April 7th, 1987, Fairview Cemetery, Colorado Springs, Colorado. It's a warm spring day in a quiet cemetery. The caretaker notices a car parked at the edge of the property. He's seen the same car in the same spot for 4 days. He decides no one's coming back for the vehicle, so he calls the police to report it abandoned.
The patrol officer looks inside the car. He looks through the side window and sees something covered with a blanket.
That something is definitely not what he was expecting.
He sees a foot sticking from underneath the blanket.
A closer look reveals the bruised body of a young woman.
The body of the deceased had some signs of trauma, yet the evidence in the car did not indicate any sign of struggle within the car. So it was apparent to us that the death was caused somewhere else. And then the body was essentially placed into the vehicle and then transported to this location.
The county coroner determines the cause of death to be anything but natural.
She has abrasions of her neck, consistent with manual strangulation. She also has some abrasions that are consistent with her fighting off the perpetrator. This is common in manual strangulations. As the perpetrator puts their hands around the neck, the victim reaches up and grabs and scratches at their hands and scratches at her own neck to try to relieve the pressure. And that's what was seen in this case.
The case is ruled a homicide, and Lieutenant Joe Kenda takes over the investigation. The veteran detective has solved hundreds of cases, but this promises to be one of his most challenging.
This is an 18 to 20-year-old girl. She's a kid. Her life is just getting started and it's over. Violently. Sad stuff. We're in a sad business.
To Kenda, where the body is discovered is always revealing.
When you look at a crime scene, I'm most interested in how did our killer behave? What did he do? What did he do to kill the victim? What did he do before he killed the victim? Maybe what he did after. Those kinds of things speak to motivation. You want to let the facts drive the theory.
In this case, the car may hold valuable clues.
Whose car is this? Somebody drives it here. You have to assume our killer does. He's killed this person. Now he needs to get rid of them along with this car. We have to assume the killer drove this car and parked it here to conceal the car and the body. The question is, did he leave behind any traces? The area where this car is found containing the victim is not commonly used by anyone for any purpose. It is just part of the cemetery property. Patrol officers that work that neighborhood don't recall ever having a call in that area regarding a disturbance or drinking or group parties where this car is located.
Investigators turn to the one man who may have seen something unusual.
We interview the caretaker who originally called it in. The caretaker is convinced that the car has been there for at least 4, maybe 5 days. The likelihood is great that this girl's been dead for some period of time.
Forensic investigators take latent prints from inside the car. Everything they find is smudged or partial. They do, however, find something else.
When we first looked at the blanket, there was hair on the blanket. It was very coarse, and I thought it might be dog hair. Human hair is relatively fine. This is very thick hair, so we wanted to collect that hair off that blanket and any other evidence that could be found.
In addition to the hair, police spot something on the dashboard.
One of the items the forensics investigators took out of the car was a piece of paper on the dash with the name Lisa and a phone number.
A run on the license plate shows that the car is registered to a 20-year-old woman named Vicki Ross.
And my first thought was, okay, now we know who we're dealing with. It's probably her in the backseat of her own car.
A records check confirms Kenda's suspicions, but the question remains, was Vicki Ross killed here or somewhere else?
Vicki lived 35 blocks or so from where she was found. So she's not parked in her neighborhood. What is she doing there? Why is Vicki 35 blocks from home?
To answer that, Kenda turns to the victim's family. He learns that Vicki had been reported missing the day before.
The parents told her she was working in a supermarket at night. She was trying to save money. She wanted to buy a better car, but she never came home from work.
It's kind of like it was surreal. There's so much of that I think I don't remember just because it was just such a horrible shock.
I don't think they mentioned where she was. They just told me that, or told us that she had been murdered, and it's devastating.
Vicki's family says that the last time anyone saw her was as she was leaving her job at a local supermarket. Vicki had planned to meet her grandparents for dinner, but never showed up at their house. And that's when they called the police.
She loved her grandma and grandpa, that would be my parents, and liked spending time with them. She just was a joy, an absolute joy. And I miss her so much.
The news disturbs Lieutenant Kenda. Why didn't she call her grandparents to check in?
We had to wonder if the reason she never called anyone is because she never felt threatened. Maybe that's because she left work with someone she knew.
Playing a hunch, Kenda asks Vicki's family about the blanket found wrapped around Vicki.
We recognized early on that the blanket that she was wrapped in was a key piece of evidence, and one of the things that we needed to determine from the family is whether or not it was her blanket or not.
Vicki's family is adamant that she doesn't own a brown blanket.
No one could identify this blanket as having come from Vicki. It was clear that this blanket could be one link to the killer.
We felt that that was a key link. If we could find the source of that blanket, that would bring us closer to perhaps where she was killed.
But for right now, the blanket remains a mystery. The next day, an autopsy finds some surprising evidence that adds another twist to this investigation.
Autopsy of the body reveals tearing or breaking of the fingernails, consistent with the struggle that would happen near death, resulting in them breaking.
Her fingernails are broken back to the quick on a couple of her fingers. The coroner thought that a struggle had taken place in which Vicki probably broke her fingernails off on her attacker trying to defend herself, and then was strangled.
The evidence suggests that the suspect will most likely have scratch marks somewhere on their body.
He also finds her pubic hair to be shaved quite recently, with swirling marks in the flesh, indicating to him the work was performed with an electric razor.
Autopsy revealed that the pubic hair of Vicki Ross had been crudely shaved, indicating that it likely wasn't her that did it.
The coroner estimates the time of death as sometime after 9 p.m. on April 2nd.
We have a very tight timeline of when the death took place. We have to determine where was Vicki Ross from 9 o'clock in the evening to the early morning hours of April 3rd. Somewhere in that span of 6 or 7 hours, somebody killed her. Our killer has a head start. I never like it when they have a head start.
When 20-year-old Vicki Ross is found murdered in the backseat of her car, the news devastates her friends and family.
We heard the news right after it happened. The West Side is a very tight-knit community. People know what goes on. You hear about the murders, you become very concerned first for the victim and then the victim's families. And then I think you become more conscious and conscientious about your own personal safety.
Vicki was a very good friend, very easygoing, very well-spoken, beautiful young lady at the time. Got along with most of the people that she had met. There was a dark time with Vicki, unfortunately. A couple years prior to her demise, there was a couple of friends of ours that we were all very close to that had died in a massive car accident. And at that point forward, she had kind of fallen into a point of a little dark space, kind of withdrawn from some people.
And with that darkness came drugs. Friends tell police Vicki was a recovering addict.
They all describe her as a wonderful person who managed to kick the drugs, who is a happy person, who is a hard worker, working 2 jobs to better herself, who has plans for the future.
Well, we did become aware of some of the wrong decisions that she had made, but we were so proud of her because she had worked hard to get out of that.
It looked like there was a turning point there. It looked like you could see it, that things were going to work out for her pretty good, but it didn't work out. She wasn't even 21 when she was murdered.
Vicki's past is now in play. Could she have been mixed up with the wrong crowd?
I'm still not sure what to think beyond the fact that I'm convinced we know who it is. I didn't like the complication of a drug life. Drug lives are very, very difficult to unravel. I was encouraged about the fact that she had dropped the life, had gone to rehab, had 2 jobs. That was good. But people that tend to know people in the drug world maintain those friendships. And that becomes immensely complicated to deal with. But I was thinking ahead of myself, and I thought, well, we'll wait, we'll see what develops.
Following Vicki's death, there was rumors going around the west side of Colorado Springs where we grew up that it may have been an abduction, and it had all been speculation. My feelings on it were that it was the possibility of a bad boyfriend relationship, where that or somebody that she knew that had abducted her.
And it's not long before a new name emerges. Vicki's old boyfriend, Hyun.
They believed that Hyun slapped her around on more than one occasion. They disapproved of him. He was her boyfriend during her drug life and has remained her boyfriend after rehab. They couldn't say enough bad things about Hyun. That immediately got my attention.
And so he became initially one of our suspects, but at that point we really didn't have any kind of physical evidence to link him to her death.
Investigators bring Hyun in for questioning.
He has an extremely bad attitude. He hates us. He doesn't mind telling us that. He says he has nothing to do with Vicki's death. He says he knows her, he dates her. Sometimes he gets mad at her. Sometimes she won't do what he wants, but he had nothing to do with killing her.
Hyun says he was working all night at a local restaurant on the evening of Vicki's disappearance.
Since there was some unusual sexual activity, such as the shaving of the pubic hairs, that caused us to begin to look into the background of any potential suspects.
But I do ask him one thing. Does Vicki Ross shave her pubic hair? And that's probably the one time he looked like he was giving me an honest answer. And he said, no, she doesn't do that. In fact, she doesn't even shave her legs half the time. And I've asked her to shave her legs. But she doesn't shave her pubic hair. And that came across as very honest.
Hyun says that Vicki had been hanging out with friends from her drug-fueled past, and that any number of them may have been the killer.
Hyun provided us with what we expected, a list of first names and nicknames of every idiot that he knew ever been associated with Vicki Ross. There's this guy and that guy, all first names, nobody identified, who believed Vicki owed them $20. In the drug world, these people are so confused because their brain is so fried on this crap. They can't remember who owes them money. They can't remember who took drugs from them, or even if anybody did.
While Hyun is being questioned, other detectives check out his alibi.
We do contact the boss and the 5 co-workers. Hyun never left the building. He was in there with all of them, laying towel on the floor. From 8 o'clock the evening of the 2nd until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning on the 3rd. So as much as I liked Hyun has no opportunity to commit this crime. So you suffer the other part of this work, and that's frustration. Hyun looks so good, and now can't be him.
Hyun is released from custody, but he has provided a list of names from Vicki's past. Most seem to be immersed in the seedy street life and drug culture of Colorado Springs.
It was not a good sign for me that Vicki was still associating with people that she had associated with when she was into drugs. It's a fatal combination. The drug world is a nightmare scenario for investigators. Nobody knows the truth. Nobody can remember the truth. No one's willing to offer the truth. People know each other by nickname, street name, or appearance. They can't remember what day it is, what time it is. They can't remember statements made by people. They will assign statements made by some person to the wrong person. They will develop hatreds of the wrong person because they forgot who they were mad at. It's an incredible situation. It makes it next to impossible to get to the bottom of this information.
Someone once said conspiracies born in hell rarely have angels as witnesses. When you have these individuals as significant witnesses as to events surrounding the time of death, you always have the problem that because of their drug usage, there may be some problem with their perception, their memory, and their motive in telling you what they need to tell you, and also how forthcoming they are. Some people don't want to reveal their own personal problems to detectives.
The investigators involved in this case, we had to spend a lot of time building some trust in her friends to say, if you can be forthright with us, we are not going to look at prosecuting drug charges based on these conversations.
Several of Vicki's friends single out an acquaintance of hers as a possible suspect. A black male in his late 20s or early 30s with short hair. His name is Dave.
Dave has been threatening Vicki to friends. He says that Vicki owes him $10. And if she doesn't pay him, he's going to kill her. It's a new name. It's a new player. Let's see what Dave has to say for himself.
The problem is no one knows where Dave is, and all police have is a vague description. Until a chance call takes the investigation in a new direction.
While we were still interviewing all these characters, the detectives kept calling the phone number found on the piece of paper on Vicki's dashboard. They kept calling and calling. That's what good detectives do.
Finally, they get a break. A woman answers and gives police their first solid lead.
The caller says she's seen Vicki just hours before her murder at the grocery store, and she was with a black male. She said Vicki told her she was going to a party. I get the feeling, just a feeling, that I'm getting closer to my killer.
10 days after Vicki Ross is found dead in the backseat of her car, detectives finally contact Lisa, the woman whose name and phone number were found on the dashboard of Vicki's car.
She explains she's an old friend of Vicki's, known her a long time. Lisa says that she sees Vicki the night of April 2nd. It's just about closing time at the grocery store. Vicki tells Lisa she's going to a party, and Lisa also says that Vicki leaves the parking lot with a black male.
Lisa doesn't know the man, but his description matches that of Dave, the mysterious person mentioned by Vicki's friends.
We already had information that Vicki was supposed to go to her grandfather's house. But then we learned that she didn't go to her grandfather's house. She went to a party. I'm starting to really like this. Now we're out of the confused drug group memory problem. We have a narrow time frame for her death, and we're starting to eat into it. And now I'm feeling good. We're starting to discover where she was for the time frame and who she was with. And that's going to give us our killer.
Kenda tracks down Dave to his apartment through a phone number provided by Lisa.
Talking to Dave raises a number of red flags. He's the same paranoid, angry guy Hune is. According to the information we had, Dave was the last person with Vicki when she was alive. Could he be the guy? Of course he could. Does he have the personality? Absolutely.
Dave tells investigators that Vicki dropped him off at home before she went to the party.
We speak to the host of the party. She says she knows Vicki, and she knows all of Vicki's friends. She tells us she did have a party on the night that Vicki died, and that Vicki came to that party. We asked her, was she with a black male? She says, no, there were no black males at the party. How long was Vicki here at this party? Oh, they were here for an hour or two, probably. More time away from our time frame. I like that, too. Okay. Did Vicki leave with anybody? Well, yeah, she left with Norman. So tell me about Norman. Well, he's a guy in his 30s, and he has dated Vicki before. So Norman and her leave this party. What time do you think they left? Oh, it was about 10:30 or 11. Now we're down to 5 hours, and she's with Norman. He's with our victim during the time frame of her death.
Norman's full name is Norman Wiegand. A background check reveals a disturbing past.
Norman has an extensive criminal history, and he's been in the penitentiary in Louisiana. His history is unique. It is all sexual assaults on females. Some of them were dismissed. Some of them he was found not guilty. But a couple of them he got tagged for. He did 4 years in the Louisiana State Penitentiary. Now Norman has my undivided attention.
The next step for us was to dig deeper into his background. We spent 8 days in New Orleans investigating his background, contacting 2 ex-wives and some victims of sexual assault cases.
The ex-wife says Norman was crazy when he was on cocaine. He was a totally different guy when he was on coke. Out of control nuts.
One of the peculiar things about this case was that Vicki Ross, her pubic hair had been shaved. She wasn't an exotic dancer. She wasn't somebody who was a prostitute or that would engage in that type of behavior. So I think police knew that the fact that there had been shaving of the pubic area was an important part of the case.
The investigators also learned from Norman's ex-wife that he has an unusual fetish.
She said she got very, very worried and frightened of Norman because he demanded to shave her pubic hair. And he did it. She didn't like it. And she said she never wanted him to do that again. Teresa tells us that Norman had a roommate, but he no longer lives with Norman. We find the roommate. The former roommate knows Vicki Ross, knows that Norman knows Vicki Ross, has also heard Norman threaten Vicki Ross over a $30 drug debt. The roommate tells us the same thing Marilyn did, that Norman believed Vicki owed him money.
Vicki's murder is a puzzle, but the pieces are starting to fall into place. But before making contact with Norman, detectives question his current girlfriend. Maybe she knows more about Norman's whereabouts the night of the murder.
We're talking with her, so what's going on? Were you at the party? No, I wasn't at the party, but I went over to Norman's place the next day, the 3rd, yes. Norman said he had to clean his apartment. And I thought that was really strange. Why did you think that was strange? Well, his place is a dump. He never empties the trash. But all of a sudden, he's all upset and he wants to clean the apartment.
The suspect's girlfriend also told detectives that she had noticed blood on one of Wiegand's sheets. He had also gone down to do laundry that morning, and he explained to her that his dog was in heat, and that was the source of the blood. Again, the fact that he was doing his laundry was something clearly out of character, and that also raised a red flag.
Police suspect that Vicki was killed somewhere other than the cemetery. Could it have been at Norman's apartment?
It makes perfect sense to me that Norman's trying to clean up. I am convinced Norman is my guy. Norman is trying to clean up a crime scene.
In the course of that conversation, she indicated that the evening after that Thursday night that he wasn't there, he did come over, and when they went to bed that night, he undressed down to everything but his T-shirt. And she indicated that his normal practice was to sleep without any clothes on, but this night he kept his T-shirt on. And during the course of the evening, at one point, she did pull up his shirt and did observe a scratch on his midsection.
Vicki Ross was found with broken fingernails. Could she have broken them scratching Norman's back?
I always look for things that mean something to me, that help me make sense of things. And I said, Teresa, I have one more question. Have you ever seen Norman shave? Yes, I've seen Norman shave. How does Norman shave? He uses an electric razor. The coroner said during the autopsy, in his opinion, Vicki's pubic hair was shaved with an electric razor. Now I know Norman uses one. I am very happy at this moment.
Based on what the detectives had developed, we felt there was sufficient evidence to ask a judge to issue a search warrant for Norman Wiegand's apartment.
My instructions are to my people that we're going to conduct a complete and thorough search. I'm hoping we find something that Norman might have overlooked or might have not seen. We start in the bedroom. We think that's our best opportunity. That's where this attack probably took place.
Forensic investigators search the bedroom and immediately turn up something strange.
Detectives found a plastic Ziploc baggie which contained what appeared to be pubic hair. Vicki Ross had been shaved prior to her murder. Luminol was sprayed on some of the walls, which seemed to indicate the presence of blood. Also, interestingly, Norman Wiegand had a waterbed. The waterbed was searched, the blankets on top of the waterbed was searched. The waterbed itself was too heavy to move, so the detectives drained the water out of the waterbed.
We lift the mattress back from the liner and immediately see the fingernail. We all believed it belonged to Vicki Ross. We knew of her habit of painting her nails. We knew what was involved with that.
Detectives find a fingernail similar to Vicki Ross's, but there's just one catch.
The only problem was there was nothing at that point to match it to.
The fingernail and hair are both solid evidence, but useless without a match to the victim. Unfortunately, Vicki is now 6 feet under.
Oh, Norman. Looks like you've been a bad boy. It's time we have a talk.
It's been nearly a week since 20-year-old Vicki Ross was found strangled to death. Based on the recent developments, Kenda brings their primary suspect, Norman Wiegand, to the station.
We advise him of his rights. He waives his rights. Now, when a convict waives his rights, you know up front he's going to lie his ass off. He's not going to give you anything that you can use, or at least he's going to try not to.
Kenda focuses on the night of Vicki's disappearance.
Norman tells us that he goes to Marilyn's house because he got invited to the party Marilyn was having. While he's there, he meets a number of his friends, and Vicki arrives. He knows Vicki, says he talks to her. They're having a friendly conversation. So he gives you what he thinks is meaningless information that in fact does have meaning. He puts himself with our victim, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he believes that he is. Norman's biggest mistake is, in his plan to avoid giving us something useful, he admits he's at Marilyn's house, he admits he's in contact with Vicki, and then he takes the fatal step. He brings Vicki home.
Kenda can now place Norman with the victim close to the time of her murder.
Norman says that Vicki decides to go with Norman to his apartment so they can watch a movie. We let Norman continue. He says, and what happened then, Norman? Well, we left in her car from the party about 10:30, 11 o'clock. Now our time frame is even narrower, and our victim, Vicki, is inside Norman's apartment at 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning, with our time of death set between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. We only have 2 hours left in our time frame. Vicki said she was tired because she worked 2 shifts that day, and she was going to go home, and she left. Did you see her after that, Norman? No. What did you do after Vicki left? I went to bed.
Having that information, we didn't know if what he was telling us was true and she in fact did leave or not, or if in fact that she stayed there and was actually killed there.
I asked him to raise his shirt. He asked me why, and I said, well, I'm looking to see if you have any scratch marks. And he said, I don't have any. And he stood up. Norman raised his shirt, turned slowly. I saw no marks on his chest or his back.
Fingerprint comparisons also fail to implicate Wiegand. Those collected at the crime scene are too smudged to make a positive ID. Despite the lack of evidence, Detective Kenda is convinced he's talking to the right suspect.
I think Norman's a prolific criminal, and I think he killed this girl. You have Norman sitting there smiling at me, telling me that, hey, I didn't do anything. Prove it. Okay, I will. But you don't want to jump the gun. You don't want to get too anxious. There's ample time here. Let's play our cards right. I want to have more in my possession before I arrest him, because I don't want any possibility of him walking away from this.
Investigators need proof. They have no choice but to release Wiegand from custody.
They knew that he walked out of the detective bureau and went out to wherever he wanted to go. But they also knew that they were starting to build a case on it.
When you are dealing with this type of situation, it certainly can be frustrating when you have to let someone you believe is a killer walk out the front door of your detective bureau. But you know that if you make an arrest at this point before you have the ability to meet that legal standard, that you jeopardize the case.
Norman has no reaction when we let him go. Norman's friendly like he was when he came in. Norman believes that he's made his story work. I believe that Norman had gotten away with crimes in Louisiana, and I wanted to make sure it wouldn't happen in Colorado.
Kenda is buying time to make his case airtight. He asks forensic investigators to make a comparison between the fingernail found in Norman's bed to those of Vicki Ross. He knows this is the critical piece of evidence that will put Norman away for good.
We start pulling photographs of the autopsy. We can't find a clear photograph of Vicki Ross's fingers to determine what nail this could be or which finger it's from. There's lots of pictures of her hands and lots of pictures of her fingers, but nothing that's working in terms of looking at the fingernail we found in Norman's bed. The only way we can be certain that we can match this torn nail to the hands of Vicki Ross, or to look at Vicki Ross's hands. The problem is, Vicki Ross has been buried for over a week. We have to take a different step, and it's one we don't like to take, and one we often try to avoid. We need to exhume Vicki's body.
Doing what it takes is what drives a successful murder investigation, and we knew that exhuming the body, one, would be a sensitive issue, and that we only wanted to do it if we had the support of the family.
This is something no one likes to do. It flies in the culture of death. In this country, a person is buried. It's closure. This person has died, and you have buried them, and you attended their funeral. The culture of death says this is over.
We are human too, and we have the same emotions, and this isn't something that's done every day. And so it was, I guess I would use the word sort of bizarre to go through those steps.
It's like having your heart torn out. It's like, poor Vicki. I mean, it's like she was being violated again, but it had to be done. We had to get this guy. They had to exhume Vicki to match that torn fingernail to her. And so, of course, permission had to be given, and they had to go through all the legalities of opening the grave. And that was a very difficult thing to go through. But it did the job that it needed to be done.
The stakes in this business are very high, whether they're stated or not. One mistake, one way or another, one lack of attention to something can result in a killer going free, a family being emotionally destroyed, all from just you. It is the ultimate form of high-stakes poker. So we get his workers to open Vicki's grave and bring the casket above ground.
The coroner opens Vicki's coffin. He removes all 10 fingernails, placing each one in a separate container. When he is done, the coroner closes the coffin and reburies Vicki Ross.
The whole time this process is going on, I'm thinking, I sure hope I'm right. I sure hope this is Vicki's fingernail. I know the fate of this investigation rides on this one moment.
It's been just over a week since murder victim Vicki Ross was laid to rest in a local cemetery. Investigators have searched the apartment of ex-convict Norman Wiegand and collected a fractured fingernail from underneath his bed. But in order to charge him with the murder, Detective Kenda must wait for a comparison to be made with those collected from the victim's body during her exhumation. That could take days.
The detectives decided to go back in their investigation. The one piece of evidence they had that tied someone to the crime was that blanket. Because the victim had been found wrapped in a brown blanket, it was important to find out where this brown blanket came from.
One of the pieces of evidence on the blanket was some sort of animal hair. It could have been dog hair. And they knew that the suspect, Norman Wiegand, had a dog. And so they went back to check that out, but it turned out that the hair from his dog did not match the hair on the blanket.
Detectives question Wiegand's neighbors, and one's about to reveal a twisted coincidence.
Mrs. Johnson explains that her and Norman share a common storage area. Mrs. Johnson puts her seasonal items in storage. What do you keep in the storage area? Well, these apartments are small, Mrs. Johnson says. So for seasonal items that she's not going to use during the summer, for example, my electric blanket. The detective immediately keyed on the electric blanket.
Vicki Ross's body was found wrapped up in an electric blanket.
Mrs. Johnson, can you describe this blanket? Mrs. Johnson says, yes, it is brown, and I still have the control unit for it here in the apartment.
She went to a storage area and took detectives with her that she shared in a common area that Norman Wiegand had access to. Her blanket was missing.
For Lieutenant Kenda, everything is starting to come into focus. He recalls that animal hair was collected from the blanket found at the crime scene.
So he asked Mrs. Johnson, do you have a dog? No, I don't have a dog, but I have a cat. Really? And the detective says he'd like to take some hair samples from Muffin, and he will try to do so as painlessly as possible. They get a brush, and they brush some hair out of Muffin. Muffin's not too pleased about this process, but my man is doing his job.
Back at the lab, the serial number on Mrs. Johnson's control unit is compared to the label on the electric blanket collected at the crime scene.
Same manufacturer, matching number. Mrs. Johnson's absolutely correct. That's her blanket. Taken from the common storage area where Norman has access to it. And the last time she saw that blanket, it was in a box. And the last time I saw it, it was wrapped around Vicki Ross.
Forensic investigators compare the hair samples from the cat to those found on the blanket. Again, it's a perfect match. The final nail in Norman Wiegand's coffin comes with the forensic results based on the exhumation.
The lab did make the determination that the striations of the tear matched up, as well as there were 2 layers of fingernail polish that also matched up from each piece. confirming that they were in fact Vicki Ross's.
That is a key piece of lockdown evidence. Part of our victim is still in Norman's bed. Crucial stuff. So now Norman's attitude that we are idiots and we don't know what we're doing, well, we know one thing to do. I can put Vicki Ross in your bed on the night she died.
Lieutenant Kenda is convinced that Vicki went home with Norman after the party.
But sometime during the night, he turned on her. Vicki broke her fingernails trying to defend herself, and Norman strangled her to death.
The choices in seeking a first-degree murder indictment were either the perpetrator committed the crime after deliberation and intentionally killing someone, or killing someone during the commission of another felony. In this case, it would have been a sexual assault. The grand jury chose to indict Norman Wiegand for first-degree murder, which is referred to as felony murder, because during the course of the felony of raping Vicki Ross, he killed her.
Now Norman has to dispose of her and her car. He takes a blanket from a neighbor's storage locker, wraps Vicki's body in it, puts it in the backseat of her own car, and drives her 2.5 blocks to the cemetery, where he abandons the car on the grounds. And he walks home.
With the evidence now directly linking him to Vicki's murder, the police arrest Norman Wiegand and charge him with first-degree murder. Facing life in prison without parole, Wiegand pleads guilty and is sentenced to 46 years in prison.
He's, a vicious criminal who shouldn't even be breathing right now. It just makes me crazy every time I think about it.
After serving only 16 years in prison, Norman Wiegand became eligible for parole. It's possible he could be released from prison as soon as November 2014.
That would really drive me nuts, to knowing that it could happen. It could be reach a point here where we just can't do anything to keep him in any longer.
Most of my memories definitely are positive. There's many times that sometimes I almost get a feeling that she's in the room with me. I'll be reading or something and I'll say, "So how are you doing, Vicki?" or something. I just feel like she's with me. And I think she always will be with me. And I think she'll be with all of us. The negative comes when we have to go down to the parole board and try to keep this monster in prison. And what we have to go through to try to just keep him where he belongs. That's where the negative comes in, and it takes a long time to kind of get over that, because it brings up all the old memories. And they feel like it just happened yesterday.
The sad part of this whole thing is that here was Vicki Ross, the young, beautiful woman trying to get her life turned around. She was on the right path when she crosses paths with somebody like Norman Wiegand.
The things that he did to Vicki can never be undone. But hopefully, they will keep him in prison. They'll keep him locked up like the vicious animal that he is. In fact, I hesitate to call him an animal, because animals do what they do because that's their instinct.
Vicki Ross was a beautiful young girl. She had problems in her life, yes, but she was correcting them. She was starting over. She was starting a new life. And it was taken from her by Norman Wiegand. It's my job to find the Norman Wiegands of the world. But it's more than that to me. These people need to be in a cage, and I like to put them there to keep them away from your daughter and my daughter too.